October 27, 1728, an English-born explorer named Captain James Cook would change the world with his voyages of polar exploration and circumnavigation of the globe. On his third and final voyage in January of 1778, in an attempt to discover a northeast passage from the Pacific to Atlantic Ocean, he would become the first Westerner to discover the Hawaiian Islands.
Captain Cook arrived at a time when there was a lot of turmoil in the kingdom. He arrived at the time of the Makahiki, which was a celebration when kind of everything stopped except celebrating the harvest. He was seen originally as possibly the returning god Lono because he was arriving during that celebration time.
According to Hawaiian legend, the god Lono, god of agriculture, was prophesied to return to the islands reincarnated. For the Hawaiian natives, it was easy to think that Captain Cook's arrival was not a coincidence. Cook's ships were greeted with gifts and welcomed. But as Captain Cook's crew took more and more food and supplies, the natives became wary of Captain Cook and the European men. Cook decided it was time to return home, but a storm would stop the ships and force them to turn back to safety.
He left and came back because of a broken mast. And the Hawaiians at that point figured out, well, maybe he's not the Hawaiian god because Hawaiian gods wouldn't have that kind of technical problem.
Fighting broke out, and the clash led to Captain Cook's death. The first battle with foreigners had started. It would be many years later that Hawaii's battle with the Western world would come to an end. By the 19th century, Hawaii was a thriving nation, united under a national constitution and monarch. Foreigners came and went freely, as the sugar industry was thriving as the principal economic support of the islands. Profits and prosperity depended on favorable treaties with the United States, who was Hawaii's chief market. Hawaii's leader, King Kalakaua, knew the importance of creating powerful economic ties during this critical period.
Kalakaua was very aware of the ways in which Hawaii was changing. It was a very turbulent period of time. A lot of Westerners here who were gaining in influence. Many of them were interested in business alliances with the United States. Many of them were beginning to be pro-annexation.
Plantation ownership and control of the business community was primarily in the hands of American and European businessmen. As the island sugar industry grew, large numbers of contract laborers were imported from China, Japan, and other countries to work on the plantations. This marked the beginning of Hawaii's multicultural population, but also meant the decline of the native Hawaiians' identity and culture. Kalakaua was determined to expand Hawaii's presence in the international community while holding on to Hawaii's ways of the past.
Kalakaua's one of the first things he did after he became king is travel to the United States to negotiate the Reciprocity Treaty. And the Reciprocity Treaty wasn't about sugar. It was about free trade between the two countries. There were a lot of products that Hawaii could import to the United States duty-free, and a lot they could export to Hawaii duty-free. So Kalakaua was the first head of state in the world history to visit the United States.
Although Kalakaua had improved negotiations and trades with the Western world, he knew that the global powerhouses still thought of Hawaii as uncivilized country. A grand palace needed to be built to show Hawaii's power and elegance to the outside world.
By 1874, the original Iolani Palace, which was a wooden structure in the tropics, was termite-ridden, was starting to rot, and so he decided that to have it torn down, and he also felt it was important to build a palace that was worthy of a kingdom that had standing in the world.
As the plan for the new palace was in place, King Kalakaua set out on his greatest mission, a diplomatic world tour. But little did he know that his country would soon find itself in harm's way. And later, a queen is imprisoned, a country stolen, and the voices of a great nation silenced. Hawaii in the late 1800s was emerging in the global community as its sugar plantations fueled the economy. With trade agreements in place and plans underway to build a magnificent European-style palace, King Kalakaua set out on a diplomatic world tour. He would become the first monarch to circumnavigate the globe in 1881. While on his journey, he would make close diplomatic ties with countries such as Japan and Great Britain. His efforts were critical to maintain Hawaii's image in front of global powers. And when he returned, his grand visions would come true, as the build of Iolani Palace was finished in 1882.
The palace was designed for entertaining and for receiving international guests. There were so many people coming through at that period of time, coming through Hawaii. There were ships coming from Russia, ships coming from China, from Japan, from America. So there was a lot of entertaining that happened in the palace.
Its guests were meant to be impressed upon arrival, as the palace was truly built for a king in the Victorian era.
The downstairs is designed so that visitors would be received in the grand hall. They would go into the parlor or the drawing room, which is the blue room. They might hear music from the nearby opera house. Some entertainers might be invited in to sing while someone played the piano. Then they would be ushered into the dining room, and in the dining room they would have lengthy meals with the king. He often entertained at breakfast and often for 3 hours at a time.
The dining room was often arranged for a small formal breakfast or dinner. The table set with a display of fine china, an assortment of silver and exotic crystals. The king's chair would be placed at the center of the table, so it would allow him to converse easily with all of his guests, while they were entertained with multiple courses accompanied with the finest wines and liqueurs. After dinner, the king would rise upon the beautiful wooden koa grand staircase, where you can find the king's private chambers, a place where he would spend much of his remaining time as king. In his library, a small selection of books remained from his extensive book collection. He was well read and collected volumes about everything from Darwin to Shakespeare. Much of the king's personality and curiosity with technology and the world still lingers in this space. In the adjacent room, a very different side of the king is on display. The king and his siblings were gifted musicians who spent many hours composing and performing original works. King Kalakaua wrote the national anthem of Hawaii, which is now Hawaii's state anthem, and his sister, Queen Liliuokalani, composed more than 100 musical compositions. King Kalakaua worried about the loss of his native Hawaiian traditions and encouraged the documentation of ancient Hawaiian songs, chants, and the perpetuation of the hula. To entertain, the king would throw lavish balls, held in one of the most symbolic rooms in the palace, the throne room. This room was used for entertaining as well as many other occasions. Official visits, inaugurations, celebrations, and funerals all took place in this Victorian-inspired room. During King Kalakaua's birthday celebration, loyal subjects and foreign residents offered their congratulations and gifts to the king in this room. But not everyone adored King Kalakaua. Many businessmen and prominent foreigners were upset with the king's extensive spending and efforts to restore power back to the Hawaiian natives.
When King Kalakaua was in power, there was a growing group of businessmen who felt that their interests were not best represented by the monarchy, and so they devised a way to curtail the powers of the monarchy. They forced him at gunpoint with fixed bayonets to sign what's since been called the Bayonet Constitution.
The Bayonet Constitution, signed in the year 1887, limited the power of the monarchy and gave voting rights exclusively to wealthy male businessmen. Only owners of large portions of land were given the right to vote.
1887 Constitution disenfranchised many Native Hawaiians with income and property requirements, allowed non-citizen residents of American and European ancestry to vote. The Chinese community in 1884, the census, 17,000. American and Europeans, only around 6,000.
Although the king was forced to sign this new constitution, he would never get the chance to right the wrong, and his sister would be left with the burden of fighting a silent war. When we return, the politics of Hawaii take a fatal turn as Hawaii's most powerful groups secretly align. And later, the palace is threatened by the world's largest war. The Victorian era was full of wealthy exhibition and appearance, but also full of secrecy. The Masons, the world's most famous and prestigious secret society, was something that greatly interested King Kalakaua.
Kalakaua was an active member of the lodge, so the cornerstone was laid with full Masonic rites. When he traveled both in 1874 and 1881, in every community he went, he tried to connect with the Masonic lodges in those communities.
King Kalakaua was a fast-rising Freemason. He would sail to San Francisco, where he would participate in a Masonic rites ritual, and, on the advice of his physician, get medical help as he was in poor health.
He was expected home in late January. As a matter of fact, a ball had been planned on the evening of his arrival from California, on his return from California. And it wasn't until Lighthouse Charlie saw the Charleston, which is the ship he was to return home on, rounding Diamond Head, or coming into view from Diamond Head, with the yards draped in black and the flags at half-mast. That's when they discovered Kalakaua had died.
Even in his last breaths, he would still think of his country and people, as his final words were, "Tell my people I tried." King Kalakaua was laid to rest in the throne room of the Iolani Palace. Hawaiian subjects and foreign residents came from all parts of the kingdom to pay their respects. But as the country mourned the king's death, a new monarch was needed. Kalakaua's sister, Liliuokalani, was proclaimed queen on January 29, 1891, just 9 days after the king's death.
His sister was asked to immediately take the oath of office as the next queen. She was reluctant to because she did not support the Constitution that her brother had been forced to sign. But she was basically told, "You're going to take the oath now." And so she did.
Queen Liliuokalani was a forward thinker. She, like her brother, was a supporter of Hawaiian culture and heritage. But under the current constitution, her powers were limited.
Queen Liliuokalani, when she came to the throne, was determined to return more rights to the monarchy, rights that had been curtailed by the Bayonet Constitution of 1887 that King Kalakaua had been forced to sign.
She begins to be petitioned by groups in the community asking for a new constitution. In her autobiography, she says, "A request such as this from my people is something I cannot in good conscience ignore." So her attempts to put into effect this new constitution are what lead up to the overthrow.
While Queen Liliuokalani gathered support and drafted a new constitution, a group of businessmen from Europe and the U.S. caught wind of Liliuokalani's plans. The foreigners and businessmen realized that the Queen's new constitution would diminish their power. For if all male citizens had the right to vote, they would be highly outnumbered.
There are a group of Americans in the community that for many years had wanted to be annexed to the United States. They also want a stronger, firmer, more regular trade agreement ability to import their goods.
A group was secretly formed under the alias the Committee of Safety, which was composed of Hawaii's born citizens of American parents, naturalized citizens, and foreign nationals. This group, with the support of the American minister to Hawaii, orchestrated a plot to overthrow the Hawaiian monarchy and establish a provisional government. The committee had many supporters in the legislative branch at the time, as it was composed of only those who owned large portions of land. When the Queen was finally ready to reinstate a new constitution, the legislative branch tipped off the Committee of Safety. After being warned of the Queen's plan, the Committee of Safety devised a plot. U.S. Marines were called ashore to allegedly protect the lives of U.S. citizens at the request of the conspirators and the American minister to Hawaii, John L. Stevens. The troops were commanded to go to the constitutional signing and stop it from being read. In its place, they demanded the Queen succeed all power to a provisional government. On January 17, 1893, Queen Liliuokalani was forced to yield her authority.
Now, to avoid any collision of armed forces and perhaps the loss of life, I do this under protest and impelled by said force, yield my authority until such time as the government of the United States shall, upon facts being presented to it, undo the action of its representatives and reinstate me in the authority which I claim as the constitutional sovereign of the Hawaiian Islands.
She abdicated rather than see any of her people hurt, thinking that the United States would see the wrong of the overthrow and would right that. And so she stepped down in order to protect the people.
The part of the challenge and part of the problem for Liliuokalani is that the Royal Guard is more of a ceremonial honor guard than a standing army. There were a number of volunteer militia units in town. The largest were the Honolulu Rifles, and almost all of the members of the Honolulu Rifles had interests with the annexationists and the Committee of Public Safety. But according to one military historian, if Liliuokalani had been able to call upon all the other militia units, they would have overpowered the Honolulu Rifles. But Liliuokalani did not want bloodshed.
With the Hawaiian monarchy now crumbled, Liliuokalani would desperately need to find a way to restore rights back to the Hawaiian people. Nestled within the center of Honolulu is Iolani Palace, one of the last remaining witnesses to the legacy of the former sovereign nation of Hawaii. The year is 1893, and Queen Liliuokalani has been forced to give up power after the Committee of Safety overthrew the monarchy.
Provisional government came in. They were immediately recognized by the American Council, who did not have any authority to recognize them at all, because according to U.S. law, only the President and Congress can recognize foreign governments. So they became the government of Hawaii, and no one seems to want to recognize them. They sent a delegation to Washington, D.C. at the same time the Queen did, because the Queen yielded to the superior authority of the United States, trusting that once they figured out what her ministers had done here, she would be restored to power.
When the Queen was young, sovereignty was ceded to Great Britain, who in the end was not interested in acquiring Hawaii. Great Britain returned power to the monarchy, and knowing this history, Queen Liliuokalani expected the United States government to do the same.
Her expectation would have been that the United States would do the right thing and support the local government as Great Britain supported the local government in 1843.
But it was not meant to be. Sanford B. Dole, named president of the provisional government, submitted a treaty of annexation to the U.S. Senate, but most Democrats opposed it, especially after it was revealed that most Hawaiians did not want annexation. President Grover Cleveland sent a new U.S. minister to Hawaii to restore Queen Liliuokalani to the throne under the 1887 Constitution. But Dole refused to step aside and instead proclaimed the islands an independent government under the name the Republic of Hawaii.
Liliuokalani's supporters in the meantime aren't sitting around waiting for things to happen internationally. They're making plans to restore her to power. Within 18 months, the Republic starts hearing rumors. This is in the fall of 1894. The Republic of Hawaii starts arresting people they feel might be involved in an attempt to restore the Queen and her political party to power.
After finding guns buried in her garden, the Queen was arrested for treason and forced to sign a document of abdication that relinquished all her future claims to the throne. Many think the guns were planted in her property and that she was framed.
She is held prisoner in one room of what had been her home, had to undergo a trial in her throne room where she was convicted of being accessory to the plot, sentenced to 5 years hard labor and $5,000. That sentence is never carried out. She is eventually paroled and then pardoned. She lobbies against annexation in Washington, D.C. after her pardon, assisted by petitions from over 90% of the Hawaiian community. Their lobbying efforts fail.
Cleveland was unwilling to overthrow the government by force, and his successor, President William McKinley, negotiated a treaty with the Republic of Hawaii in 1897. In 1898, the Spanish-American War broke out, and the strategic use of the naval base at Pearl Harbor during the war convinced Congress to approve formal annexation. 2 years later, Hawaii was organized into a formal U.S. territory. During World War II, the palace would be threatened when the Japanese, Hawaii's old ally under the monarchy, would bomb Pearl Harbor. Martial law had been declared in the Hawaiian Islands after the attacks, and the palace, standing strong, would have a pivotal role in the war, as it became headquarters for the military government. After the war, the people of Hawaii were united under the United States flag, as many Hawaiians had enlisted in the military to defend America during World War II. In 1959, Hawaii officially became the 50th state in the Union, and Iolani Palace became the state's Capitol building.
The palace's involvement was, this was the Capitol building after the monarchy was overthrown.
This building has been used for all of the successive governments up until the 1960s. 1969 is when the state government moved out. So this has housed the provisional, territorial, and state governments.
Even though the country of Hawaii did not survive, Iolani Palace is viewed by many as a symbol of Hawaii's sovereignty and remains intact after surviving some of Hawaii's most troubling days.
There are some that see it as the Capitol building of the Kingdom of Hawaii, which they believe still exists. There are others that see it as Kalakaua's message to the world that Hawaii was an important player in the international community in the 19th century.
The controversial story of the island's